Surprise. From Politics PA, I'm Steve Ulrich, and this is Voices of Reason. This week, the U.S. Senate is debating the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, or the SAVE Act, the voting bill that President Donald Trump is calling his number one priority. The act will require voters to prove U.S. citizenship when voting, require showing an improved photo ID at the polls, require states to turn over voter rolls to Homeland Security, and broadly ban mail-in voting. The bill also includes two non-voting provisions, restricting medical care for transgender children and banning transgender women and girls from competing in women's sports. Today, we talk with Pennsylvania House Republican leader Jesse Topper and Amy Widestrom, the executive director of the League of Women Voters Pennsylvania, about the SAVE Act and its potential impacts on America's most important swing state, Pennsylvania. That's next on Voices of Reason. Now on Voices of Reason, I'm pleased to be joined by Pennsylvania House Republican leader Jesse Topper. Representative Topper covers Bedford and Fulton counties, and we're pleased to have him join us today. Thank you for being here. And first of all, could you explain exactly what the Save America Act is and why it would be good for Pennsylvania?
Well, from a federal perspective, this is the federal government's way of ensuring that our elections not only are free and fair, but also have the trust of the public. I think if there's anything that we have learned over the past decade is that trust in our institutions, particularly when it comes to government, but not exclusively there, is waning among the public on both sides. And I don't think that's as specific to one ideological spectrum or the other. And I think something like the SAVE Act, which would require voter identification to vote in elections, would ensure that only American citizens are voting in elections, will go a long way to restoring that trust. I think that's the idea behind it. I know there's still details to work out. It's in the Senate right now, and I'm sure that those conversations are ongoing. But I think that's the bottom line here, Steve, is that it's about restoring trust of the people in their elections, and by doing that, also restoring trust in our institution of government.
I think one of the things that's misunderstood about the SAVE Act or the Save America Act, whichever you prefer, is that it's not as simple as just presenting the ID you carry with you on a daily basis, as Pennsylvania driver's licenses or real IDs don't qualify as acceptable forms of ID because it doesn't indicate citizenship. What do you say to those who might say the SAVE Act is a form of voter suppression because of that?
Well, I don't see it that way. And I think when you're presenting at the point of registration, you do need to require the citizenship piece. I don't think that's suppression. I think we all have it. We all need that in many other forms. Whenever we're talking about registering for something, or I know I see that a lot in our office when you're getting ready to go to get a real ID. So if you have those forms of identification of which you're speaking, you had to be able to get that at some point through many of these documents. And again, I think when it comes to registering to vote, that those are essential.
We already have something in place when a county board of elections, registers someone to vote. You're required to mail them a card with their name, home address, address of the polling station they should be going to, and the party affiliation if listed. Why do you think that wouldn't satisfy those who are worried about election integrity as long as you have that along with the state issued ID?
Well, I believe that those who are worried, as we all are willing to look. I know in Pennsylvania, we looked at a voter ID law that was simply presenting what you had as a government issued ID, right? And even then, we heard the same calls of whether voter suppression or that we're out to prevent people from voting. I think what you're hearing are the traditional talking points against voter ID, regardless of the ID required. We're simply trying, and I think that there's probably still more work that would be done potentially in the Senate. But the bottom line is what we're trying to get to is ensuring that those who are citizens are voting in these elections that are for the citizenry. So I believe that the path created is not voter suppression, it's election integrity.
I know as a former election director myself, I know there are rare circumstances where someone who is not registered to vote does cast a ballot. It's usually done via provisional ballot, typically during a presidential election. And officials then have the opportunity to verify the status of that voter before counting the votes and stopping illegal voting in most cases. With this in mind, is the SAVE Act a solution in search of a problem? Or do we have so many illegal voters that this is an increasing problem?
I think the word so many is very subjective, Steve. If we have one person voting that shouldn't be and that ballot's getting through, then we have a problem. And even above that problem is the overall problem that I spoke about in the beginning, which is if people don't trust the system, then you have, quite frankly, voter suppression going the other way. When people just are giving up because they don't trust the system, they don't believe that it's giving them the results that are accurate and fair and legal. And if you have that, what do you have? I think this is a measure that will restore a great deal of that trust in voters and make the system overall better. And so I think you got to look at it from that perspective as well.
I know Democrats are saying that they're not opposed to voter ID, just the strict provisions in the SAVE Act. Do you believe this is the case?
I believe for some of them it could be the case, and then I believe some of them, again, I've heard these same talking points on many voter ID laws that have been passed or tried. Recently, we saw they fought with the Supreme Court to have voter ID bills kicked out. So, look, I'm not going to speak for the entirety of the Democratic Party. I'm sure there are those who are genuinely concerned with the details in the legislation, but would support the overall concept. And then I think there are those who are opposed to the concept entirely.
The difficulties involved with getting the votes necessary in the US Senate, the fact that the bill may have to be amended to get it through that chamber and then come back to the House. Should this not get passed federally, is this something that you see coming back just to have the effects on the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania?
We've looked at voter ID bills in Pennsylvania. Again, the same issues that they're having trouble with in DC, we find that we have trouble with in Pennsylvania. One side believes it doesn't go far enough, the other side believes it goes too far. And so you have internal questions, you have um, intra and inter party issues when it comes to trying to pass uh, legislation of this kind. And so it's all about finding the right mix. I'm sure that's what the Senate's looking at now. It's what we're going to have to look at in Pennsylvania. How do we get the votes? There's a Democratic majority by one in the House. There's a Republican majority in the Senate by two. And then you have a governor with presidential ambitions. So you put all of those together. It is not easy to produce legislation of any kind, let alone in regards to this issue. That doesn't mean we're going to stop trying and stop trying to find, because I do believe that there is a problem, and I do believe that voter ID is part of the solution. It's just how can you marry the two?
Politically, does I think a lot of folks may say this turns into a political balloon come budget time. We'll use voter ID as a trading card or a trading chip, if you will. Um, I get the sense, though, this is a more important issue to Republicans in terms of needing to get this done versus use it to try to pass a budget.
I don't know that I fully agree with that in Pennsylvania. I don't think that I feel as though the national movement is what everybody's watching right now, because if we feel that there's going to be something addressed nationally, I haven't heard it as, oh, you got to bring this to the budget table from my members. In fact, I've heard the opposite. Maybe let's wait and see what happens at the federal level first. So I don't think this is a bargaining chip for the budget table in Pennsylvania, at least not at this time. I think a lot of us are waiting to see what comes out of the U.S. Senate.
I know there's one other issue that's really risen to the top of the discussion with the SAVE Act, and that's that married women and other Americans who have changed their names would also be required to provide updated documentation to register to vote. And oftentimes, you're not going to see married women who have changed their birth certificates, et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond to that?
That's what's required right now for Real ID. We deal with that in our district offices. For instance, women who have changed their name or have changed their name back after changing their name once. These are the documents that are required for Real ID, which is what we require to go into a federal building right now or get on an airplane. So I think these documents exist and there are paths for it. If there are ways that we as kind of localized elected officials can help through our district offices, we're going to be more than happy to do that and ensure that everybody has access.
Why, and I'll wrap up with this one. Why do you think these election issues are so important to President Trump?
I don't think they're just important to President Trump. I think we have heard, I mean, there was a voter ID bill passed in Pennsylvania under Governor Tom Corbett. This is not a recent discussion. This is something that has been a priority for many for years. And many states have adopted it. So I think it's important to this administration, but I think it's been important to the integrity of elections for decades now. This is just the time where it's risen to this level of debate because there's actually a bill that has been passed by the House, is in front of the Senate, and would be signed by the president.
My thanks to Pennsylvania House Republican leader Jesse Topper for joining us on Voices of Reason today. Thank you, sir.
Great to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
Now on Voices of Reason, we're pleased to be joined by Amy Widestrom. She's the executive director of the League of Women Voters Pennsylvania. And Amy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You know, we're talking about the SAVE Act as it's being discussed in the U.S. Senate right now. And to some people, although there's a lot of people that think voter ID should be part of Pennsylvania and national elections, other people say it's a solution in search of a problem. What say you?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. And I want to make very clear from the outset that the League of Women Voters, national and at the state level and at the local level, that we are nonpartisan. So we don't work with any parties. We don't advocate for any particular partisan position. Our number one priority is making sure that all eligible citizens can access the ballot and that votes are fairly counted and that voters have all the information they need to feel empowered to vote. I think the most important thing to recognize, well, there's a couple of things to recognize about the Save America Act, but one of the most important things is that it is not truly and singularly a voter ID bill. It is primarily a documentary proof of citizenship bill. And so the very first hurdle that anyone would have to get over to vote under this piece of legislation when registering to vote is providing documentary proof of citizenship. This comes in the form of either a passport or an original or certified birth certificate. And there are millions of people who don't have access to either of those documents. 49% of Pennsylvanians don't have a passport. Fully 13% of Americans can't put their finger on or even hope to put their finger on the birth certificate. So it would be a hurdle to even register to vote for many people. If your birth certificate and your ID that you would also need, you would still need a government ID along with your proof of citizenship to register. If your names don't match, so the 69 million married women who have changed their names, if those don't match, the bill requires the state to come up with an affidavit process to document that name change. It is radically underspecified. It is left up to the states on how to sort that out. So we've been getting questions. What does the affidavit look like? How would I get it? And we don't know the answer to that question because it is not specified. And so 69 million women would have to figure that out if they needed to re-register to vote. So change their party or change addresses. So that's the first hurdle. And then there's the voter ID hurdle, right? Pennsylvania already has a voter ID law that is reasonable and works. We do not have any instances of in-person voter fraud that are affecting our elections in any kind of way. And so it is a solution in search of a problem, right? in-person voter fraud just is not a problem that exists. And this bill radically restricts the kinds of voter IDs that would count. So you would have to show it every time you vote, not just the first time you vote in your precinct, but it restricts the IDs that count. So student IDs would no longer count, for example, which would really affect our students who we need to be empowering young people to vote. They are our next generation of leaders. And third, it criminalizes election workers if they make a mistake and think a document proves something that it doesn't, and they register somebody. They can be sued, not just by a government entity, but by a private citizen. They can be charged with a crime for erroneously registering a voter. And taken together, it is just going to radically restrict access to the ballot, and the League of Women Voters just cannot support that.
As a former elections officer, the last thing I want to have happen is being sued by any citizens because
Anybody.
of an error. Exactly. So talk to me through the ID. So Pennsylvania has their own driver's license, obviously. They did the real ID, but my understanding is because it doesn't indicate citizenship, that's the issue?
Well, yeah. So only 25% of real IDs across the country have an indicator of citizenship on the ID card itself, on the face of the ID. And so while you need citizenship documents to get a license, so my 16-year-old daughter just got her driver's license. To get her permit, I had to produce her birth certificate. So there are these steps that require those sorts of proof, but it's not documented on the face of the ID itself, which is the requirement. And so real IDs wouldn't count as documentary proof of citizenship. That you would need it to register because you need your proof of citizenship plus your government ID to register to vote. So you would still need it, but it would not count as a proof of citizenship document.
You had mentioned that the fact that American women would certainly be affected by all this, but it would also affect overseas and military voters and their families, wouldn't it?
Oh my gosh, it would affect. Well, yes. The thing that we haven't talked about yet is that this bill would require you producing an ID every time you vote, even if you vote by mail. So this would mean if you vote by mail, you would have a certain amount of time to show up and present your ID in person. And everybody would have to do that. So it would effectively end the ability for millions of people to vote by mail. So senior citizens, overseas voters, just by virtue of mobility problems or geographic problems, right? Like if you cannot get to your election office and present your ID in person, your vote would not be counted. And so it would disenfranchise millions of voters that way. It would also hurt, organizations like ours, you would know this as a former elections official. In the state of Pennsylvania, we're one of the most populous states, the 5th most populous state in the country, but we have one of the smallest election staffs in the country. And so organizations like the League, who go out and register voters, who do it well, we work with election officials to make sure that we're doing it properly and we're submitting the right information. That would all end because if we collected voter registration information, that person would still have to show up to the election office and present their documentary proof of citizenship. We couldn't confirm that. It would have to be confirmed by an election official. So essentially, the lift of registering voters that helps out our election staff who are already overworked and under-resourced, all of that extra support by organizations, nonpartisan organizations, would fall away as well.
I know the Commonwealth has dealt with this for the better part of 10 years. I know that when a resident of Pennsylvania registers to vote, the County Board of Elections is required to mail them a card, which has their name, their address, the address of the polling station, and their party affiliation if they give it. Why would that not be enough to present that card, perhaps, and just a regular photo ID? Why wouldn't that satisfy Pennsylvania lawmakers?
Well, it might satisfy Pennsylvania lawmakers. Our voter ID bill that currently exists is actually quite reasonable. And, I mean, you can use a utility bill, you can use your hunting license, right? There's all sorts of things that you can currently use in Pennsylvania that the League of Women Voters is frankly pretty comfortable with. And I'll tell you, some democracy organizations would like it even less stringent, but, reasonable voter ID, I think is fine. The problem is that this is a federal this is a piece of federal legislation, and it is only directed at federal elections, which is also tricky. It has the potential to introduce the idea of a two-tiered registration system or a two-tiered election system where you need one set of documents to vote in federal elections. So for your members of Congress, your senators, and the president, and a separate set of registration rules and voting procedures to vote in your state and county and local elections, which is also just a complex and complicated nightmare for election officials, frankly. And so, so while that could be a very reasonable solution to Pennsylvania lawmakers, that is not sufficient or is not included in this particular piece of legislation. So for federal elections, that wouldn't be sufficient.
I'm trying to imagine what that would be like in terms of educating voters. An organization like the League of Women Voters, you're trying to register more people. And from the outside, when you hear these types of things, it's difficult not to say that those in power right now are trying to suppress the vote. You talk about a poll tax, needing to buy a passport or whatever you would need to do to
It's expensive, right? Passports are $165. Birth certificates, if you know how to find your birth certificate, which many Americans don't. And in part, it's complicated, right? And it varies by state, frankly. So, $25 or $30. Sometimes you have to pay for the mailing or the shipping. So there is cost associated with it. I mean, I think everyone is interested in election security and election integrity, right? There's no, I think there's no disagreement on that. I think where we disagree is that if you spend any time in our polling places in the state of Pennsylvania, they are secure. Those workers have integrity. The system has integrity. The chain of custody for ballots is strong. The processes work. Even when there are mistakes, like we saw in Chester County, Senator McCormick called out Chester County on the floor of the Senate and said, that the Save America Act would have fixed that problem, which just isn't true. It was a totally separate issue. And Chester County followed their rules and responded and handled it quite well. It was a mistake, but they handled it well. Our elections work and they are secure. And they're fueled by thousands of poll workers. We need 45,000 poll workers every election. And we need people to trust the system. And the thing that worries me most is that rhetoric like this just undermines that trust. And it does make it harder for us to get citizens to believe our politicians and to want to support the politicians. And so our work is really, right now building, trying to hang on and build that trust in the system, because just the rhetoric is harmful, and our system is strong in Pennsylvania. And I'll add that the damage has in part already been done. I mean, there's lots of folks who hear that the bill was passed in the House and they think that means the bill has been passed. And so we are getting lots of questions. We're getting emails, we're getting phone calls. Do I need to re-register? Do I need to get my passport? People are already thinking this is happening. And so in some respects, it's already affecting our voters in Pennsylvania. And so not only are we trying to sort of work against, these bills that will ultimately have a suppressive effect, we are now having to educate voters and remind them it actually isn't law yet, right? You can vote as you always have. It's tricky.
We always hear that one of the reasons, the rationale behind this is that we need to stop illegals from voting. You served as a judge of election. I served as an election director. We know that folks who are not registered to vote will come in and cast a ballot on election day. I know from my work, we counseled our election workers, allow them to cast a provisional vote. We can always stop it later. Isn't that the way this stops? Are you hearing larger numbers of illegal votes are sliding through with at
Yeah.
the legal level?
There's two arguments that, there is this idea that non-citizens somehow get through the registration process and are able to register to vote, which just wouldn't happen. There are about 5 checks on the back end that election officials have to go through. They have to check multiple databases. It is extraordinarily difficult for non-citizens to register to vote and then cast a ballot. So those checks are already in place, and the instances of non-citizens registering and voting are infinitesimal. That doesn't mean that you're not going to hear stories that are cherry-picked, to say, see, it happens, and we can say, okay, 1 in 31 million votes or something. But the systems are in place to check that, and these are deeply human systems, and sometimes there might be one mistake. But there's a number of checks on the back end when folks register to vote that keep non-citizens from getting registered. And then you're right, as judge of elections, when people came in and thought they were registered, if they're not on the poll book, you see if they're in the wrong precinct. And if they are, you tell them to go to the right precinct. If they don't want to do that, or they're not registered to vote, you can say you can cast a provisional ballot. And then, yes, on the back end, the county election workers verify. And the other part of the work that organizations like the League do is we observe that adjudication process. So we watch that happen. It is open and transparent. We watch them open the ballots and say they read off the information. They've double checked, not registered, we're not counting it. Registered in the wrong county, can't vote in this precinct, we can't count it, right? It's a remarkable process. It is time consuming, but the counties do it. And if you are a non-citizen, it is exceedingly difficult and exceedingly rare for you to be able to vote.
We'll get you out of here on this one. What other impacts is this having on the League of Women Voters?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, part of our job is to pivot and be responsive, but sometimes these issues can really sort of take over a moment. And this feels like one of those moments. And so I'll say it's, in a strange way, it's sort of been a blessing and a curse, right? There are people who are realizing. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I said, call your senators and about the Save America Act. And she said, I don't know what that is. And so I told her about it, and she said, I hate paperwork. I don't want to carry paperwork to vote. I was like, who does? And she was like, I will, right? And so we hosted an alternative spring break with students the other day and made 50 calls to senators' offices across a couple of different states. It is engaging people in ways because I think it feels so deeply personal, right? So one of the ways it is impacting us is that we are, in some respects, we are helping people to channel this sort of energy and, frankly, some of this anxiety. One of the best way to counteract helplessness and hopelessness and anxiety is action. And they can come to us and do that. And so we're sending out calls to action. Here's what you can do. And it is, we've been working on voting rights for 106 years. We just turned 106 years old on Valentine's Day. And so when people say, the League is partisan, now that you're focusing on this, I can say we've been focusing on voting rights for 106 years, more than that, right? And so, look, the ground shifts underneath us and we stay focused on the same thing. And it's an important time. And so the interest has overwhelmed us, sort of both in a good way and a bad way, right? Like, it is a lot of what we're doing these days, educating folks on what they need and what they don't need and what this means and how to advocate for themselves. And we're able to help folks channel their energy and their interests. And we're seeing new people get engaged and involved. And so, it's a bit of a blessing and a bit of a hurdle.
My thanks to Amy Widestrom, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters Pennsylvania, for taking the time to join us today on Voices of Reason. Amy, thank you.
Thank you so much.
My thanks to Pennsylvania House Republican Leader Jesse Topper and A.B. Widestrom, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters Pennsylvania, for joining us today. This episode was engineered by Brianne O'Neill and produced by Olivia DeMarco. For more Pennsylvania political news every weekday morning, sign up for the Politics PA playbook at politicspa.com. That's it for Voices of Reason. I'm Steve Ulrich. See you next time.
Surprise.